make a decision, here's what we're going to do, and then move forward.
I've seen the other side. Excited. I'm smiling. It's funny. My teammates say, "You act like you just got out of prison." I said, "Well, Green Bay's like a Fortune 500 company, and the Texans are a new franchise. They're a startup that's figuring out their way." And I think that the moves that they made when they brought Caserio in and Coach Culley, I think that they're on the path. I think
good.
Davis Watson injured, was he in the building?
Well, as I said before, we're day to day with it. The only thing that's changed from the standpoint of that is we make decisions every day based on what's best for our football team, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles, and we're back at training camp. There's actually players out on the field with footballs, jersey numbers. I've not got a clue, half them are. But the Texans football's back for the 2021 season. It's been a really old and long off-season that we'll probably never forget, whatever happens this year. But there's actually guys out there playing, and it feels like the page is turning towards the off-season, I think. And we had Drew on last week, and just flying solo this week. Obviously, there's going to be a number of practices with pads on that we can actually take some material outtakes from, rather than Deshaun's body language, and we'll come on to him in a second. Wasn't out there today for the first day of padded practice. But last week, Caserio's maybe best move of the off-season in some form or another was trading Randall Cobb, now completely derived by Aaron Rodgers, who's thrown his weight about in the front office in Green Bay, and they've obviously let him do that, and fair play. You've got to keep your star quarterback happy. Functional organisations try to do that, but obviously we are some separate to that, and Randall Cobb had some very choice comments to make about Houston, and he said teammates told him he looked like he was smiling that he'd been out of prison, and he compared him to a Fortune 500 company versus a startup, and yeah, it's probably a bit of jarring when you hear that from a guy who's been around the league, and he's been obviously that's when he's come from Dallas as well last year. But yeah, here we are, and that's just the reality of where this team's been and many of the reasons why we're in the trouble we're in. But Randall Cobb, obviously, you get a late round pick back for that. Not ideal. You take on some of his salary, but yeah, it was a step forward, probably a year earlier than you thought you might see that one. And then we bring in Anthony Miller as well. We touched on it very briefly last week, but yeah, Anthony Miller comes over from Chicago, former second round pick guy at Memphis. They traded up for, got all the shifty and technical ability you need to play that slot, but he's also got some versatility to play on outside, and there's been some positive reports, and I think really, in the first couple of days you can only take one-on-one cornerback versus receiver outputs from the camp, because it's just not real football otherwise, but that's what you can practice non-contact. But it looks like Anthony Miller's come over here with a point to prove. He's in the last year of his contract, but he's, like many guys, just putting himself in the short window, and it's a prove-it year for him, so we'll see where Anthony Miller goes. But where you've got one guy and one out pretty quickly on a much cheaper deal, and potential to keep him on for future years at a far more reduced cost on the salary cap than you would have with Randall Cobb. But Cobb moves on, some choice comments. He did say, though, Caserio was moving this in the right direction, and I suppose he is in many ways. But I suppose the awkwardness of the first couple of days is interesting, because you've got Deshaun there, who probably didn't quite think the Texans would be as comfortable with the uncomfortable, and then they are, and I think that goes back to Caserio, and and he referenced at the Sloan Conference, which is an analytics-based sort of organisation that talked to Caserio and a number of guys around the league, and he talked about the Texans himself, and prior to Randall Cobb talking about that as a startup. So Cobb may just have been paraphrasing or repatriating the comments of Caserio from a conversation they may have had, or it may be that one. But as we try to move on with this issue, I think the analytics point is that that Caserio was obviously comfortable to let him sit and to let him dangle around, and he was. I know there was a lot made about his body language and what he did and what he didn't do, standing with a beanie hat on, being the blitz and safety, calling the signals, whatever he was doing, personal drills. But as soon as any team stuff came about, Deshaun wasn't there, and I suppose it's a visualisation of where the relationship's got to. You've obviously had another complainant come out and talk, which we said against our lawyer's wishes, on YouTube, and did a lengthy podcast and gave an account of what it was like to have him as a massage client, and it was terrible to listen to in many ways, and it was just exactly the same characterisation that she'd given that you'd heard all before. So there's another one, plus the legal suits, and it doesn't seem like this is going to go away anytime soon. There was a comment today that the Eagles have cleared some salary cap with Derek Barnett and Lane Johnson, $14 million off their books in the day that Watson isn't out there. It almost looked staged that he just had somebody looking at his foot yesterday, and look, it might be on the precipice of the biggest move and the biggest change in this franchise history. May happen sooner rather than later, but when you listen to those comments, when you listen to all the kind of stuff that's going in the background, when you see the numbers rising still, even at this stage, 4 or 5 months on from when these reports first emanated about Watson and through any kind of trade talks off the tracks, and at the same time teams were doing their due diligence on the rookie class before making any moves up till the draft. Thrown at some disarray, we're still seeing the final embers of the Deshaun Watson era in Houston. Never thought it would end this way, but certainly it looks like the team are happy to just sit, grin and bear it, and wait for the right time and the right value, and good on them, because that is the only way you can get out of this unscathed. A big change really from on the field matters, I think, from the coaching staff. Was always going to be very different this year. And Culley continued to do that. He got his MC hat on as he's out there in his bucket hat every day, doing limited coaching from what everybody is reference. He's a walk-around head coach, and Caserio's probably done more coaching than he has from the reports that we've seen. And I think that's an interesting dynamic. You've got it as decried as Camp Caserio on Radio Sports 610, and there's not many front offices around the league that overshadow the head coach in many buildings, and we're seeing that here, and I think that speaks to the temporariness and the feeling that he's very much a placeholder, and I think he's okay with that, and he's trying his best to get a tune out of a roster that's not really got all that much talent. There's some question marks and there could be some improvements, but I think he's certainly there to just build the culture, I think, and Caserio takes a far more active role in training camp and out there throwing footballs and speaking to the media on a far more regular basis than Nick Caserio, or Caserio does that far more than Rick Smith ever did, and Brian Gain was a short time, small sample size, so perhaps can't compare to the fullest, but certainly he's putting himself out there, being the face of the organisation, and he's playing very much the lead role of this team. But Caserio continues to consistently churn the roster, and I think that's been a big departure from the Bill O'Brien era, that we relied on top heavy stars or of a roster composition and not a huge amount change at the bottom. There was some churn, but Caserio's taken this churn to a whole new level, I think, and he continues to bring in players. We gave a tryout to a number of players this week. We brought in Danny Isadora, who came from the University of Miami, and he continues to iteratively go after and improve this roster, so that the days of we like our guys and we're very fixated on the people we have here, and the people that were here too long and weren't replaced by younger, more hungry or talent who could be more productive for you on a Sunday, I think it's definitely gone. So it's refreshing in that point. But there's definitely so many questions on this roster of how we'll cut it down and how we'll get to that point. But certainly Culley playing a very much a secondary role, a figurehead, and Caserio just continuing to pull the levers every week, and continues to look at ways that we can keep changing and keep adjusting this roster. And I wouldn't put it past him at least another 10 to 12 changes on this roster prior to the conclusion of pre-season games, if not more. I think there's definitely something we're just going to probably have to accept, with 4 going, or certainly not looking like he's ever going to be back in pads or taking meaningful snaps in training camp anytime soon. I think we're just going to have to get used to the quarterback play of this team is going to be really different this year. We've been so used to big, long, developing plays down the field. It was a staple of the O'Brien offense that the plays were built around, and or certain plays were leading up to build tendencies to try and hit guys long, and Will Fuller's obviously not here, but I think the quarterback ability to hit the ball long is just not there, and I think Davis Mills shows he struggled with that, and Tyrod Taylor struggles with that as well. So there's definitely an element of building up short intermediate passes, and making sure that the run game complements that enough to just to take the pressure off, and I think you can't judge Tyrod until you can see him fully running in pads, and he can bring in and suck up linebackers to the line of scrimmage, because obviously he's not the most gifted athlete in terms of arm strength, in terms of matriculating the ball down the field, making long plays, but what he can do is use his feet and try and bring the attention to safeties and linebackers in the second and third level, and then that's where you will open up space that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So it's hard to judge guys without the pads, and we've got 1 day of it so far, but there's definitely limitations to Tyrod's game. We all know that, and I think there's an element of will he get injured or not, and the history and of his career would suggest he would, and I think you've got a potential. David Mills, I think Driscoll has shown that he's not capable of being a player at this level by some of the reports, and he continues to hang on. But I would expect the Texans, based on all the information given and all the constant interceptions, that they'll look to try and replace him and cut down, because surely there's a 3rd or 4th string quarterback on another team that are a bit better off at that position, who could potentially replace him and give somebody with a bit more upside and a bit more meaningful contribution to this roster, because it seems like he's just making the defense rack up numbers and look good at this stage. But Davis Mills had a bad day by all accounts at the weekend there, in Tyrod's absence. He had a planned absence from the team due to a personal matter, and he had a bad day. But then I think what's important is he faced some adversity, and he looks like he's going to bounce back. And okay, there's reports today just coming out just before we jumped on here that he got picked off by Vernon Hargreaves, which after Vernon's performances last year will probably irk people somewhat, but he's learning, and 11 college starts, very, very little tape, so you want to try and protect him as much as possible. But these are all great learning moments and days early in camp that he can make these mistakes now, and the more he gets out, and he can learn from it and show he's learned from it, and then improve when he comes back to the line of scrimmage and the next player the next day, and then that'll show growth of a guy who could potentially contribute in some way or another, or just hold down the fort if, say, Tyrod Taylor gets injured. But I think if he does, and it would seem likely, Tyrod, this team could be in a little bit of trouble if it happens early, because I don't think Mills is ready yet. He's got a lot of development to go, and we all knew that. That was obvious from his college tape, and it was obvious from the amount of games he's played at high school and at Stanford. So that there is a lot riding on Taylor just to keep this ship afloat this season. But we'll see if he can do that or not. But certainly, his red zone 5 interceptions will be it went down as one of the worst performances at training camp as a Houston Texans quarterback is put in the last 20 years. But it's whether he learns from it or not is the big question. And as you said, the pads go on this week, and it's interesting if we'll actually see real football, and we'll be able to make an assessment on, and guys you're watching, Justin McCray inside, Justin Britt, if he's going to be able to play and lead this team at centre, who's going to play left guard, is Max Sharp and there or thereabouts. Does Danny Isadora, does one of Fialtalt, or one of these guys that are coming out of left field potentially to play on one of those two spots have the capability to come and do that. I think you can't rule out Lane Taylor. I think he's still out right now, and him and Marcus Cannon haven't been in, hence we've seen a bit of shuffle at the line. Brought in Reiter, who was at the centre at Kansas City there for a workout. We've not progressed with him, but I think certainly the interior of the offensive line at those two guard spots, particularly if Britt's going to hold down the centre spot, and it certainly seems like he will, then there's definitely a lot to be learned in them. And I think even guys like Lane Taylor and Britt, they've not played for 2 seasons, the pair of them, so there's a lot to learn about where they are physically, because it's all very well just in helmets and t-shirts, but when you finally get out there and actually put on the pads and get to grips with the guys on the opposite side of the trench, then you find out exactly where they are. And I think we can't make a judgment, and we'll definitely come back and talk about that more next week once we've seen a number of padded practices to get a feel for where these guys are individually. And of course across the defensive line, one of the biggest and most important pieces, Ross Blacklock on this team. Can he make a jump from last year? Low pad level, his helmet was pointing down, ended up on the turf a lot, didn't show the fundamentals that you'd expect from a borderline first round pick, but right at the top of the second round pick as part of the Hopkins trade, he didn't show anything, and I think if he hadn't have been the investment, could have been a very, and it was a 1 year deal guy based on his tape, he wouldn't be back. I think that's quite simple. So, we'd all like him to break out, we'd all like him to come and have a level of contribution each week that's going to make a difference on the football field. But I think Ross Blacklock has got a long way to go just to be functional. And then if he can build on that, and this scheme suits him better and just get him to shoot gaps like he did at TCU, then and other guys at the four up front, then it will definitely be a success for this team in terms of being better at the defence. Now, how good they can be against the run, I think Malik Collins holds a lot of answers to that, as does Jaleel Johnson, as did Vincent Taylor. So, what do these guys look like on pads? Who's going to be the starting two guys on the outside? And this is the trope season where you hear people talking about this guy's lighter. Whitney Merciless has had that. So has Ross Blacklock. They've talked about people being lighter, being fitter, best they've ever felt. You hear that because you can't say anything else beyond that. But there's definitely been some very honest and candid appraisals of the performances last season. Heard Zach Cunningham talking there, less so on his part, but definitely on Justin Reid and Whitney Merciless. They were very, very clear that they were aware of their poor performance last season. They're both two high character guys, but you'd expect that from them because they're pretty aware and pretty nouseful about the game of football. So hopefully we'll see that those guys bounce back, because we're going to need those as cornerstone pieces of the defense and what they look like. Jacob Martin, how's he going to be able to transition to a defensive end in this system? And Shaq Lawson, the guy that's come over on a trade, he's expected to probably be your most impactful pass rusher. Will that prove to be true? We'll find out. And Jordan Jenkins in that same boat as well. What do these guys look like with the pads on, going up against Titus Howard, going up against Laramie Tunsil, and a couple of other, Rod Johnson, Charlie Heck, a guy in Heck, he definitely looks like he's been in the weight room over the summer. A couple of clips of him emerging from the tunnel, looks completely different, particularly in his upper body. So, he'll be fighting for that fourth or third tackle spot, the swing tackle spot, probably with Rod Johnson on the step chart. As it's all said and done, as we start to get towards the games, we're about a week and a half so away from travelling up to Green Bay. And I think one of the running back spots as well, you've got to understand, look, David Johnson will be on this team and given every chance to be the one or number two. I think that was evident when somebody sent me a picture of the 4 jerseys they were selling at the merchandise stalls. They've tried to really invest in the fan experience at training camp, but David Johnson was one of those 4, along with Laramie Tunsil, Justin Reid and Whitney Merciless. So yeah, you can guarantee those guys will all be on the team. And I think, Tunsil's abilities undoubted, application perhaps so, a little bit less, but you think Justin Reid's been the biggest call out at camp so far. And is that the competition level making him look good? Time will tell, but it's a contract year for him. And Jordan Aikens, who I think definitely shone on both sides of the ball on air. So let's see what it's like in camp. But definitely David Johnson, going back to that earlier point, he is definitely going to be on this roster. And I think it's probably a toss-up between Mark Ingram and Philip Lindsay. You've got to give the nod to Philip Lindsay, just being the younger guy. They may well keep all 3, but it would seem difficult in terms of this roster composition to do that. In similar skill sets, both power runners, guys who are going to make the tackles. But if they do keep both of those guys, then that will just show you the commitment to the run they've got. And we won't be seeing too many passing plays in our composition of run to pass play. Will completely flip on its head and some from last year. So a lot to be decided, but there's very early days yet, and we want to get some first-hand accounts to try and talk you through this training camp rather than giving reports of reports. We want to get straight from the horse's mouth. So we're going to have a couple of guys on in the next 2 to 3 weeks talking through the pre-season games as well, about what training camp's looking like, how we can expect this roster to shape up. But I think the big thing at this, or the biggest noticeable point of this roster, if you try and sketch it out from the 53, and then obviously you've got the practice squad, we're going to be calling 14 this year. I think there's probably 15 to 20 spots that you can make an argument are definitive, and then after that, I think guys are going to have to go and earn their spot. And I think there's a lot to be decided. There's certain guys, like Moore, the wide receiver who's come over. I think he's got a leg up just because he's got history with Culley, and I think there'll be certain guys. If Derek Rivers is on the team as well, then we'll maybe start to worry. Driscoll's here, perhaps because of his religious connections, but we'll see, and we'll find out who's really making these decisions. They've talked about not being the best, but the right 53. But it's all to be decided, really, and I think you've just got to take a pinch of salt at this time of year, and I think there's been many camp stars, Lestar Jean being the biggest one, never really caught a pass for the Texans in the league, but looked like the best player that everybody was talking about. Trindon Holiday in the pre-season never really did it for the Texans, went to Denver, failed as well. So, I think you can't really know until the real lights come on week one. And Kahale Wareham was a good example of that as well. A guy who strikes a hugely physical figure out there, but yet is yet to prove that he consistently play football at a high level and know his assignments and know his technique and know what he needs to do on the field. But against Green Bay in joint practices and in 2019, he was deemed unplayable. Got an injury. Unfortunately, at a bad time for a rookie, and all these rookies so far have done healthy, but Waring's never really recovered from that, having that short start. And I suppose that's probably why Brevin Jordan report, Garrett Wallow to a degree, but Nico Collins seems to be the star out of the rookie class so far. I think you've probably got to again consider the context of who he's up against, and he's playing against John Reid, he's a slot corner, he's burning him on the outside, fair enough, makes a good clip on to share on socials, but he's definitely, you want to see him up against maybe Bradley Roby and then some more starting caliber players in the pre-season. But I think all things point to a successful trade up at this stage for Nico Collins, and I think the consistency is an element that all rookies will need to find, but it looks like we might have got a good one there. But as we said, we will never know in its fullest until they start doing it on a regular basis in competitive games, and this is all very much just a prelude to that, and we can't crown anyone or decide anyone's going to be a breakout star. I know people are looking for positive storylines, but we're just going to have to wait and see until it pans out and see who's actually going to be a credible player and some irons in the fire for this franchise to move on. As I said, with the Eagles news today and Deshaun not being out there, we may be on the precipice of a big move, and it may or may not happen. We'll find out. I think, and that's just the shadow that looms over us until that happens. But certainly it looks like the players are back out there. We'll get some people back in the next couple of weeks just who have been there and seen it with their own eyes to discuss some training camp thoughts and takeaways, and we'll try and form some formation of this roster as we see it in the next couple of weeks once we've seen real football against NFL opposition in pre-season. As I said, we're just over a week and a half away for travelling up to Green Bay, and football will finally be back. But just a quick express edition, just some thoughts on training camp and what you should and shouldn't perhaps pay attention to this next couple of weeks. But thanks again for listening. You can check everything out at podcasttexans.com on Facebook and Twitter, and we'll be back again next week.